The wind howled across the frozen land like a wild animal, loud and sharp. The storm had covered everything: trees, roads, even roofs. Thick snow kept falling from the gray sky, and the air was so cold that even machines stopped working. Reed stood by the small window of his shelter holding a mug of hot tea. He lived alone, deep in the outer woods of a colony planet. He liked peace, silence, and distance from the cities. But even he had to admit, this storm felt wrong. Too strong. Too sudden. Something about it felt alive. He turned away from the window and sat near the fire, but just as he lifted the mug to his lips, he heard something strange. Wah. Wah. A cry. Faint, almost lost in the wind. Reed froze. He stood quickly and went back to the window. Nothing. Just white. He opened the door. Cold slapped his face. Instantly, but he didn't care. He stepped outside wrapped in thick clothes. The wind was fierce, but the cry came again, faint but clear. It was not an animal. It was a child. Reed followed the sound, boots sinking deep into snow with each step. His flashlight cut through the storm, shining across trees, rocks, and shadows. His heart beat faster with every cry he heard. Then he saw it, a small figure half buried in the snow near a fallen log. He rushed forward, kneeling beside the shape. It was a child. But not human. The skin was pale violet. The fingers were long and thin. The child's body shook with cold, lips blue, eyes barely open. It looked no older than 5. The child whispered something in a weak voice. The words were not in English, but the fear in them was easy to understand. Reed didn't hesitate. He took off his thick coat and wrapped it around the child. The body was light, far too light, as if the child hadn't eaten for days. Reed lifted the little one into his arms and turned back toward the shelter. The wind was cruel. Snow hit his face like knives. But he held the child close and kept moving, pushing against the storm. When he reached the cabin, he kicked the door shut behind him and ran to the fire. He placed the child on the rug, then added more wood to the fire until the flames roared. He brought towels, warm water, and his emergency heater. Carefully, he began rubbing the child's cold arms and legs. "Come on, kid, stay with me," Reed whispered. The child let out a soft cough, then another. It was a good sign. After 30 minutes, the color returned to the child's face. Reed wrapped them in 2 blankets and held a spoon to their lips. "Try this," he said gently. "It's warm broth." The child sipped slowly, hands trembling. Reed smiled. "Good. That's it." The child looked up at him with big silver eyes. There was confusion and, but also trust. Reed spoke softly. "Where's your family? Your mother?" The child didn't answer at first, then whispered one word. "Mara." Reed repeated, "Mara? Is that your mother's name?" The child nodded, slowly, then began to cry, softly like they were trying to be brave. Reed's heart ached. He knew what it meant. The child had been left alone in the storm. No one else had come. No one else had cared. But why? And where was the mother now? That night, the child slept beside the fire, safe in warm clothes and blankets. Reed stayed awake, watching them breathe. He had many questions. How had the child ended up in the woods during the deadliest storm of the season? Where was Mara? And why had no one come looking? Reed didn't know the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. If the child hadn't cried, if he hadn't opened his door, the little one would have died out there in the cold. He looked at the small sleeping body and whispered, "Don't worry, kid, I've got you now." Outside, the storm still raged, but inside that small wooden cabin, something strong had begun. Not just warmth, but hope. And soon, Reed would learn, this child was not the only one lost in the snow. The next morning was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick white blanket across the forest. Trees bent under the weight of snow, and the world looked still, like a painting trapped in time. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned. The small alien child slept peacefully, wrapped in blankets, breathing soft and steady. Reed sat nearby, sipping tea and watching the flames dance. But one thought stayed in his mind. Mara, the name the child had whispered. If she was the mother, where was she now? Was she alive? Had she been searching, or had she given up? Reed stood, picked up his heavy coat, and strapped his boots tight. He grabbed his pack, filled it with emergency gear, and quietly stepped outside. The cold hit him, fast but not as harsh as yesterday. He looked down at the child, still resting near the fire. "I'll be back soon," he whispered. "I'm going to find her." Reed followed the same path where he had found the child. His boots crunched through fresh snow, and his breath fogged the air. He scanned every tree, every rock, every mound of white. He called out loudly, but only the wind answered. "Mara, can you hear me? I found your child. You're not alone." Nothing. He moved deeper into the woods. The snow was thick and untouched, until he spotted something. A trail. Faint footprints, small, light, barely visible, but not the child's. These were larger, staggered, like someone had been limping. His heart raced. He followed the trail for nearly 20 minutes, deeper into the forest. Then he saw it. A shape, curled near the base of a tree, not moving. Reed rushed forward. It was a woman, an alien woman. Her skin was the same pale violet as the child's. Her body was wrapped in torn fabric, stiff with ice. Her hair was frozen in strands stuck to her face. Her arms were around her stomach like she'd been trying to keep warm or protect herself. Reed dropped to his knees beside her. "Mara, can you hear me?" Her lips were blue, her eyes half open, staring but not seeing. He checked her pulse, still there, weak but alive. He lifted her gently. She didn't speak. Her head rested against his shoulder, and her body was cold like stone. Reed didn't waste time. He turned back and moved fast, holding her tight. Back at the cabin, the child's eyes opened just as the door burst open again. They sat up, gasping, watching Reed carry the frozen woman in his arms. "Mama!" The child rushed forward, but Reed gently raised a hand. "She's alive, but she needs warmth, now." He laid Mara by the fire, just like he had done with the child. He removed the wet cloth, wrapped her in thick towels, and started rubbing her hands and arms. The child helped, pressing close to her side and whispering soft words. After what felt like hours, her lips trembled. Then her fingers moved, her eyelids fluttered and opened. Silver eyes, wide and scared. They locked onto the child beside her. "Mean," she breathed. The child sobbed and held her tightly. "Mama." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then she noticed Reed. Her body tensed, her arms curled tighter around her child. "No hurt, please." Reed held up his hand slowly. "I won't. I brought you here. You were out in the snow. Your child found me first." Mara looked between Reed and her son, confused, but not angry, just tired. So very tired. That evening she sat, on the floor near the fire, covered in blankets, drinking warm broth slowly from a cup. Her voice was hoarse, her hands shaking. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help?" "Alien." Reed looked at her carefully. "Because you needed help. No one, human or alien, deserves to die alone in a storm." She looked at her son, who was curled beside her, already drifting back to sleep. She stroked his hair gently. "My people closed doors," she said. "Said storm would take weak ones. No room for broken families." Reed frowned. "So they left you?" She nodded slowly. "My mate died last season. I am nothing now. They said we slow them down." Her voice cracked. So I took my child, ran, hid. Storm came, and I fell. Reed's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but this was different. This was cold rejection, from her own kind. "You're not nothing," he said quietly. "You're a mother. You're brave, and you're here now." She stared at him for a long time. Then she whispered, "You saved what I love most." Reed shook his head. "No, he saved you." I just answered his cry. For the first time, a faint smile touched Mara's lips. That night the fire glowed warmly. The storm had passed, but the real warmth came from something else. A child's cry had reached a stranger's heart. A stranger had answered, and a broken family had just begun to heal. The storm outside had calmed, but inside Mara's heart, a storm still raged. She slept that night beside her child in the fire, wrapped in thick blankets. Her body was safe now, but her mind, it was still lost in fear. In the middle of the night, the silence broke. Mara screamed. It wasn't a soft cry, it was loud, sudden, sharp. Reed jumped from his bed, heart racing, knocking over a chair as he rushed into the room. The child Mian had already woken and was hugging his mother tightly. Mara's eyes were wide open, but she didn't see what was in front of her. Her breath came fast, her hands shook, and she cried out in her native tongue. The sound was filled with panic. "No more cold, don't take him," she screamed. Reed knelt slowly beside her. "Mara, it's okay, you're safe, he's here." She looked at him, tears falling, chest rising and falling quickly. She backed against the wall, eyes full of terror. Reed didn't move closer. He just kept his voice low. "Look," he said, pointing gently. "Mean is right here, he's not gone, you're not in the snow anymore." Mean crawled into her lap, his small arms wrapping around her. "Mama, no cold, no cages, no dark." Her breathing slowed. The panic began to fade. Mara's eyes finally focused, and she saw what was real. Fire, blankets, her child. Reed, not danger, just safety. She wrapped both arms around Mean and sobbed quietly into his hair. Reed didn't sleep after that. He sat by the fire watching the flames. Morning came slowly. Mara finally drifted into a deep, quiet sleep, her arms still wrapped tightly around Mean. When the sun rose, Reed stepped outside for fresh air. The snow sparkled now, no longer threatening. But he couldn't stop thinking about the look in her eyes. That wasn't just fear from the storm. It was something older, something buried deep. He returned inside and began cooking a soft breakfast. The smell of warm food filled the cabin. When Mara woke again, she looked calm, but distant. Reed placed a bowl in front of her and smiled. "Eat, you need strength." She picked up the spoon slowly, as if it were heavy. Mean encouraged her with a little nod. She began to eat, slowly. After a few bites, her voice came quietly. "I dream bad things," she said. "The cold, the people, the voices. I see cages." Reed sat down across from her. "You were locked up?" She nodded, eyes down. "Before I escaped," she whispered, "they put us in a metal place for processing. They called us slow, useless, too weak to be useful." Reed clenched his jaw. "They said we would take up space, waste food, that I couldn't give anything to the colony." Her voice broke again. "I was just a mother. That was not enough." Reed's voice was firm. "It is more than enough." She looked up slowly, unsure if she could believe it. He continued, "You survived the snow. You protected your child. You ran when others gave up. You're not weak, Mara. You're stronger than anyone I've seen." Her lips trembled. Then she asked, "Why do you say this? I am not your kind." Reed gave a soft smile. "Because kindness isn't about species. It's about being human. Inside." She stared at him for a long moment. Then for the first time, Her shoulders relaxed. Later that day, Mara watched Reed chop wood near the side of the cabin. Mean sat beside her, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. She whispered, "He laughs again." Reed looked up from his work. "He's a strong little guy." "I thought I lost him," she said softly. "I told him to run while I fell in the snow. You didn't lose him, he brought you back." Mara looked down, quiet. "I owe you more than I can ever give," she said. "You gave him back to me." Reed shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Just stay safe." She stood slowly and walked over to him. For a moment she just looked at him, then placed her hand gently over his heart. You have good fire here," she said. Then she turned back inside, leaving Reed surprised and silent. That evening, as the fire glowed again and the stars peeked through the window, Mara sat beside Reed, holding Mean close. She didn't speak much, but her eyes said it all. Gratitude, safety, and a question still hiding behind her silence. Would this shelter last, or would the world try to take it away again? Reed didn't know the future, but he knew one thing. If anyone tried to hurt them again, they'd have to go through him first. The days grew quieter after Mara stopped screaming in her sleep. She didn't speak much, but her eyes no longer held the same panic. She ate without shaking. She helped sweep the floors. Sometimes she even hummed softly while brushing Mean's hair near the fire. But Reed could sense it. There was something Mara was still hiding, and Mean, the child, had begun drawing strange things in the ashes by the fire, not stars or trees, but shapes, dark ones, a box, a crying face, stick figures with long arms standing over a smaller one. One night after Mara had fallen asleep early, Mean crawled up beside Reed, tugging his shirt. "Can I tell you something?" the boy whispered. Reed nodded. "Of course." Mean looked at the door, then at the window, then back to Reed, as if checking the room for shadows. "I saw the place where they locked Mama." Reed leaned forward gently. "You remember?" Mean nodded. His silver eyes were wide but steady. It was cold. Bright lights, no walls, only glass. They made her sit on the floor for hours. If she moved, they yelled. Reed's heart sank. "Were you with her?" Mean shook his head. "They put me in a different room, small, just me. Sometimes they made me watch her, on a screen." Reed felt his hand clench the armrest of the chair. Mean continued. "She didn't cry, not even once, but I knew she was scared, because she wouldn't blink. She was too afraid to close her eyes." The boy's voice cracked. "She thought they'd take me if she blinked." Reed had no words. He just put his arm around the boy and pulled him close. "I wanted to scream," Mean whispered, "but I remembered what Mama told me. Quiet children survive longer." Reed's chest tightened. What kind of world had taught a 5-year-old to think that way? The next morning, Reed was chopping wood outside when Mara came to stand by the doorway. "You spoke to Mean?" she asked quietly. Reed nodded. "He remembers more than you think." She looked down. "He shouldn't. He's strong, like his mother." She didn't smile. Instead, she stared into the trees. "My people used to honor mothers. But after the war, everything changed. Resources became less. Those who couldn't fight or produce were called drains. I became one." Reed looked at her. "You were a widow." She nodded. "And no one cared. A widow with a child was seen as a weight, not a person." Reed stepped closer. "That's not how it should be." She met his gaze. "It's not how you treat us. That's why he trusts you, why he calls you safe man." Reed blinked. "He calls me that?" Mara nodded. "He thinks you came from the snow to protect him." Reed laughed softly, then looked toward the sky. "Maybe I did." That afternoon, Reed and Mean built a small wooden chair together from scrap wood. Mean called it Mama's throne. When they presented it to her, Mara didn't speak. She just sat down on it slowly, touched the sides, and whispered, "No one ever built me anything before." Mean jumped into her lap and hugged her. You're my queen. Mara laughed. Just a small sound, but real, and Reed saw it. The fear in her eyes had changed. It wasn't gone, but now it stood beside hope. That night, as the fire glowed and snow drifted gently outside, Reed looked across the room at the alien woman and her son sitting on the rug. He no longer saw them as guests. They were home. And for the first time since the storm, he allowed himself to imagine a future, with them in it. But far away in the forest, someone else had seen the smoke from his chimney. Someone was watching, and they were not coming to offer help. They were coming to reclaim what they believed they lost. The sun was low in the sky when the knock came. It wasn't gentle. It was hard, demanding. Bang, bang, bang. Reed looked up from the kitchen. He had just finished heating soup for Meehan. Mara had gone outside to hang clothes in the cold air, wrapped in layers. Meehan sat near the fire, drawing on paper with a broken pencil. The knock came again, louder. Reed's heart skipped. No one came out this far. No one ever knocked. He walked to the door and opened it slowly, just a crack. 3 figures stood outside. Tall. Alien. Their skin was gray-blue, their cloaks dark and dusted with snow. Their eyes were narrow, filled with something that looked like pride and poison. One of them stepped forward. His voice was smooth but sharp. You are the human. Reed nodded slowly. That's right. We've heard rumors, the alien said, that you're sheltering one of ours, a woman and her offspring. Reed's eyes narrowed. I don't know who's telling stories, but I don't owe you any answers. Another alien stepped forward. Mara is a defect. She ran during evacuation. She belongs to our settlement. We've come to retrieve her and the boy. Retrieve? Reed repeated, voice low. She was given a place and she refused her duty. Her child was unauthorized. You're holding what is not yours. Reed opened the door a little wider, stepping into the cold. They're not objects, and I'm not handing over anyone. The third alien's eyes darkened. You are interfering in internal matters of our kind. We could report this. You're violating shelter neutrality. Neutrality doesn't apply when someone's life is in danger, Reed snapped. You left them to die in the storm. That wasn't neutrality. That was cruelty. The first alien stepped closer, voice now colder. This is your final warning, human. Send them out, or you'll be known as a thief of the unworthy. From behind Reed, a soft voice called out. She is not unworthy. It was mean. He stood in the hallway, his small hands shaking, but his eyes bright and brave. She is my mama, and she is good. You don't get to take her again. Reed looked back at him, then at the aliens. Go, Reed said. Before I forget how to be polite. The leader glared. You'll regret this. No, Reed replied, stepping back, inside and shutting the door in their faces. I'll regret if I ever let people like you win. Meehan ran to his mother, who had just entered from the back door, holding a frozen shirt. They came, he said, hugging her tightly. They tried to take you. Mara looked at Reed, eyes wide with fear. How did they find us? Reed shook his head. I think they followed the smoke. Or they saw movement in the trees. Doesn't matter now, they know. Mara dropped to her knees, holding Meehan close. They'll come again. With more. With power. Reed crouched beside her. Then we'll be ready. That evening the cabin changed. Reed reinforced the windows with scrap metal. He laid traps along the path into the woods. He pulled out an old plasma cutter from storage, something he hadn't touched since his factory days. It wasn't a weapon, but it could become one. Mara didn't just sit back. She helped, quietly, carefully. She packed bags with food, wrapped blankets into bundles, taught Meehan how to recognize warning sounds and follow her quickly if they had to run. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She had been frozen once, lost, helpless. Now, she stood tall beside the man who gave her fire again. And Reed saw it. She was no longer hiding. She was preparing. That night, as the fire glowed inside and darkness took the land outside, Reed sat with Mara and Mean on the cabin floor. Mara looked at him and said softly, "You stood between me and them." "You would have done the same," Reed answered. She nodded. "I would have, but no one ever did that for me before." Mean climbed into Reed's lap. "You're not just safe man anymore." Reed smiled. "Oh yeah? What am I now?" The boy looked at Mara, then back at him. "Home." Reed didn't speak. He just held the boy tighter. But outside the trees, deep in the frozen shadows, eyes still watched. The villagers had left, but they weren't done. Next time, they wouldn't knock. Next time, they would break the door down. Snow fell gently outside. The storm was long gone, but the memory of what had happened, the knock, the threat, the words, still echoed inside the cabin. Reed worked quietly, screwing metal braces onto the windows, double-checking locks, and testing the heating core. Every noise outside made him turn his head alert. But Mara, she was different now. She wasn't hiding anymore. She swept the floors. She cooked soup with herbs Reed had forgotten he even had. She taught Mean her old songs, sung softly in a language Reed didn't understand. There was strength in her steps, now, calm in her voice. She was no longer a guest in his shelter. She was becoming part of it. One afternoon, Reed sat on the porch, sharpening his tools, when Mara stepped outside with a warm cup of tea in both hands. She handed one to him without a word and sat beside him on the bench. The silence between them was peaceful, not awkward. After a moment, she spoke. "In my world," she said slowly, "a shelter was only for storms. Temporary. A place to wait and run again." Reed nodded. "Same here sometimes." She looked at him. "But this place, it feels different." He glanced sideways. "Because we built it together?" She nodded. "Because here, I feel seen." Later that day, Mean ran through the cabin holding a wooden spoon like a sword. "Papa!" he shouted playfully, pointing at Reed. Reed blinked, surprised. He looked at Mara. Mara looked back at him, lips parting in shock. Mean had never used that word before. Reed knelt slowly. "What did you say, buddy?" Mean smiled shyly. "Papa. That's what the humans call father, right?" Reed's voice was soft. "Yes, that's right. I heard it in a storybook, but I like it better for you." Reed didn't know what to say. He only nodded and pulled Mean into a quiet hug. That night, after Mean had fallen asleep, Mara sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. "He has never called anyone that," she whispered. Reed sat nearby, watching the same fire. "I'm not trying to take anyone's place," he said gently. Mara shook her head. "He gave it to you. That name, not me." She turned to look at Reed. "When you carried him from the snow, when you carried me," he saw something I had forgotten how to see. Reed tilted his head. "What's that?" She smiled softly. "A future." The next morning, Reed woke to the smell of bread. Actual bread. He walked into the kitchen to find Mara baking small, flat pieces of something between bread and cake. Mean was mixing flour, his face covered in white powder. "What's going on here?" Reed laughed. Mara held up a piece. "This is called Valarn. It's old. From my grandmother's recipe." She handed one to Reed. "We eat it on new days." He took a bite. It was warm, soft, and slightly sweet. "A new day, huh?" She nodded. "Is today one?" Mara looked around the cabin. The new curtains she had sewn from scraps. The chair Reed and Mean built for her. The fire that never died. "Yes," she said. "Today feels like a new day." But as the three of them sat down to eat together, Reed noticed something else. This didn't feel like survival anymore. This felt like living. He looked at Mara and Mean laughing, sharing food, speaking in both languages. The fear hadn't vanished, but something stronger had taken its place. Home. Not just a roof, not just fire, but people, warmth, choice. After the meal, Reed opened a small drawer and pulled out an old photo frame. The glass was cracked, the picture faded. A younger Reed with his parents long before war and planets and loneliness. He handed it to Mara. "This was my family," he said. Mara took it with care. "Do you miss them?" "Every day," Reed answered. "But I think I'm starting to understand something." "What's that?" she asked. He looked at Mean, then at her. "You don't just lose family. Sometimes you find it again, in the last place you expected." Mara's eyes filled with quiet tears, but she didn't look away. "I thought I lost everything," she whispered. "But maybe." The storm only cleared the path. That night, they put a second lock on the door, not out of fear, but out of care. They placed a small symbol on the wooden wall, a mark from Mara's culture. It meant safe inside. And for the first time since the storm began, no one dreamed of cages. No one dreamed of running. They dreamed of staying. The final snows melted slowly under the golden light of spring. What once was a deadly storm had passed, and now the land breathed again. Tiny green shoots pushed through the earth. Birds returned to the trees. Streams began to flow. Inside the small cabin, things had changed too. The wooden walls now held signs of life, drawings from Meehan, scraps of stitched cloth from Mara, and tools neatly hung by the door. The scent of warm food, clean laundry, and fresh air floated through the windows. Reed stood outside, staring at the trail that led back to town. It had been weeks since the villagers had shown up. No one had come since. But today, something strange appeared on the horizon. A ship, not large, not loud. It landed softly in the clearing like a falling feather. Polished metal, markings of Mara's people on the sides. Not the cruel villagers, not soldiers. This was a rescue ship. Meehan ran to the door, eyes wide. "Is that from Mama's world?" Reed's heart sank a little. He looked back at Mara, who stood quietly behind him, hands folded. "It looks like it," he said. A tall alien woman stepped down from the ship, dressed in soft white and silver. She had kind eyes. She held a scanning device and a communication badge. "Mara," she called in a warm voice. "We found your signal. You're alive?" Mara stepped forward slowly. "Yes, I am alive," the woman smiled. "We've been searching. Some of us, those who still believed in the old ways, not the ones who abandoned you. We are here to bring you home." Reed didn't speak. He stood still, heart heavy. He looked at Meehan. The child's face was hard to read, half hope, half fear. And then he looked at Mara. Her face was calm. She turned to Reed, her voice soft. "They came for me." He nodded. "You should go, you'll be safe." She tilted her head. "Am I not safe now?" He looked down. "This place, it's small, cold, simple. I don't have a palace. I don't have anything they do." She stepped closer, eyes deep. "But you gave me something they never did." "What?" "A choice." The alien woman stepped forward. "Mara, we can take you anywhere. A better world. Education for your son. A future with your people." Mara looked down at Mean, then up at Reed, then back to the woman. She took a deep breath. "I found my future," she said. The woman's smile faded just a little. "You don't wish to return?" "I have returned," Mara said clearly. "But not to a place, to a feeling, to a family. I choose to stay." Meehan held her hand tightly. "Can Papa come too?" The woman looked at Reed, studied his eyes, then gave a soft nod. "If you ever change your mind, this disc will guide you. It's your door. No one will close it again." She handed Mara a small silver disc. Then, without another word, she turned and boarded the ship. It rose into the air slowly and disappeared into the sky. Later that night, Reed sat by the fire, the silver disc in his hand. He looked at Mara, who was sewing a patch on Mean's torn sleeve. "You could have gone," he said quietly. "You could have had more." She smiled, not looking up. "More isn't always better." He said nothing for a while, then asked, "Why did you stay?" Mara looked up now, her voice soft and steady. "Because when the storm came, the world turned its back on me." She glanced at Mean, who had already fallen asleep near the fire. "But you opened your door, and after the storm passed, you didn't send me away. You gave us warmth, safety, and love." Reed's throat tightened. He tried to hide it behind a half-smile. "I guess we're stuck with each other now." Mara shook her head gently. "We're not stuck. We're chosen." The fire crackled. Wind tapped the windows gently, and outside, the world moved forward. But inside that cabin, time slowed. A man who had once chosen silence, a woman who had once been left for dead, and a child who had cried in the storm, now sat together under one roof, not as strangers, not as survivors, but as something stronger, as a family.